Hello, hello, hello. And thank you for joining me for the second episode of the deep dive into APAC. Now, before we go any further in talking about APAC, we need to discuss the man behind APAC, Mr. Isaiah Leo Cy Kenen, March 7th, 1905 to March 23rd, 1988. He's Canadian born and studied philosophy at the University of Toronto. He went on to become a United States philanthropist, journalist, and attorney. He started off as the founder of the American Zionist Committee for Public Affairs, AZCPA, the precursor for AIPAC. Emmanuel Kenen is his father, who was also Jewish, was born in Kiev during the Russian Empire and was an insurance agent. He established the first Benai, my apologies if I mispronounced this, Zion Club in Toronto. He also attended the first meetings of the World Zionist Congress. Now, as far as Isaiah's career, he was a journalist for the Toronto Star. In 1926, he moved to Cleveland, Ohio. In 1933, he was admitted into the Ohio Bar Association. In 1941, he became the president of the Cleveland Zionist District. During the 1940s, he became the information director for the Jewish Agency. In 1948, he became the United Nations Israeli delegation member. Until 1951, he was registered as a foreign agent for the Israeli Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And that was under the Israel Office of Information per the Department of Justice. He transitioned to an unregistered lobbyist for Israel after 1951. According to the Department of Justice Foreign Agents Registration Act, it was ordered that he continue to register as a foreign agent, but he refused to comply, and he wasn't made to comply. In 1951 and in 1953, he was the Washington representative for the American Zionist Council, which was a tax-exempt umbrella organization of the American Jewish groups focused on Israel. In 1954, he organized the American Zionist Committee for Public Affairs, once again, AZPAC, the pro-Israel lobby with control and financing independent of the American Zionist Council. As you remember from yesterday, AZC. In 1959, AZPAC became AIPAC, which alienated the Zionist Organization of America. They felt that AIPAC risked surrendering control to others who were less dedicated to Israel being a sovereign Jewish state. So now, let's get back into more things. AIPAC. Now, upon its founding, it was the lobbying division of the American Zionist Council, AZC. It was created in part as a response to negative international reaction to the October 1953 Kibaya massacre. Once again, my apologies if I mispronounce it. The Eisenhower administration suspected AZC of being on the Israeli government's payroll. Lobbying efforts and finances were separated into a different company. In 1963, AIPAC was incorporated. From 1953 to 1974, it was headed by Kenen. Kenen did not win support through campaign donations or influencing elections. He decided to, and I quote, play with the hand that is dealt us. In the mid-1970s, AIPAC gained the political and financial power to affect congressional opinion. There was also a militant emergence during the Carter presidency as a toward the Middle East policy shaper. And keep in mind, President Carter did subsequently write a book talking about this and the fact that he's on the side of Palestinian freedom. In 1980, Thomas Dine, the executive director, developed AIPAC's grassroots campaign. In the late 1980s, the board of directors included four highly successful businessmen: Mayor Bubba Mitchell, Edward Levy, Robert Asher, and Larry Weinberg. And they're kind of behind how AIPAC was able to create a 3-decade-long pro-Israel Congress. In 1982, AIPAC affiliated activists in Skokie, Illinois, supported Richard J. Durbin in order to oust U.S. Representative Paul Findley. Now, they wanted to oust Findley because he liked and described the PLO leader Yasser Arafat as enthusiastic. In 1984, Robert Asher, a Chicago board member, asked Charles H. Percy to run against Paul Simon, chair of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, who supported a deal allowing Saudi Arabia to buy airborne early warning and control military planes. If they don't like you, they oust you expeditiously. Now, in 2005, there was the AIPAC espionage scandal involving Lawrence Franklin, an analyst with the Pentagon, who ended up pleading guilty to espionage charges. He passed government secrets to Steve J. Rosen, the AIPAC policy director of the time, and Keith Weissman, an AIPAC senior Iran analyst. AIPAC fired Weissman and Rosen because it was uncovered, and in 2009, the charges against Weissman and Rosen were dropped. March 7th of 2019, a resolution was presented by Democratic leadership and was passed. It was presented March 6, 2019, that condemned anti-Semitism. It also condoned bigotry against a wide variety of groups. Now, the stated purpose of AIPAC, what they say to the public, is to lobby Congress on behalf of Israel. They do hold regular meetings with Congress and hold events to share views. They create caucuses in every congressional district, and staffers organize each district's Jewish community. Their goals when it comes to Israel: substantial aid to Israel. In March of 2009, Howard Corr, the then executive director, went before the House Committee on Appropriations Foreign Operations Subcommittee and requested $2.775 billion in military aid for the fiscal year of 2010. This was called for in the 2007 Memorandum of Understanding, which allocates $30 billion in aid over 10 years for Israel. Their position on Iran is to encourage a strong economic and diplomatic response coordinated between the United States government and China, Russia, and European allies. Hold on to that thought. In 2012, they called for crippling sanctions on Iran via a letter to every single member of Congress. Doesn't seem like they were championed for much when it came to Iran. In 2013, with the Nuclear Weapon-Free Iran Act of 2013, AIPAC lobbied for increased sanctions and economic embargoes on Iran. This was stalled due to resistance from Obama. Now, some of the things that they tout as success stories. In 2009, a House resolution was passed condemning the UN Goldstone report. It was passed 344 to 36. Now, the UN Goldstone report discussed human rights violations from Israel in Gaza. Sound familiar? In 1997, Forbes named AIPAC the second most influential group in the District of Columbia. In 1995, they were early supporters of the Counterterrorism Act of 1995, which allowed for increased FBI resources for fighting terrorism. AIPAC garners $3 billion annually in aid to Israel. This is the largest cumulative recipient of U.S. foreign assistance since World War II and is transferred to Israel during the first month of the fiscal year and is not designated for any particular projects. Also, early in March of 2022, AIPAC created its first PAC. Now, the AIPAC Annual Policy Conference is the second most attended by federal officials event in the District of Columbia, second only to the State of the Union. The supporters of AIPAC are the majority of the members in the Democratic and Republican parties. Now, their most notable controversies. In the 1970s, former Senator William Fulbright stated that AIPAC should have registered under the Foreign Agents Registration Act, FARA. In the 1980s, former senior CIA official Victor Marchetti said AIPAC should register under FARA because they're not working in the best interest of the United States or even people within the country. They're working for the best interest of an entirely different country. Good old patriotism, right? In 2006, Representative Betty McCollum demanded an apology after an AIPAC representative called her vote against the Palestinian Anti-Terrorism Act of 2006 support for terrorism. Once again, sound familiar? This is why I say it's time to stop letting lone wolves speak. Let them hear your voice. For a long time, people have been giving AIPAC pushback, but it hasn't been enough. But let's continue. AIPAC disputed the claim, and then eventually McCollum declared it over and resolved. In 1992, David Steiner, the AIPAC president, was forced to resign. And it's because a recording of him bragging about his political influence in regards to gaining aid for Israel came to light. He claimed to have negotiated and cut a deal with Jim Baker, then Secretary of State. He said, and I quote, "I got almost $1 billion in other goodies that people don't even know about." He also claimed to be negotiating with the incoming Clinton administration over who would be appointed Secretary of State and Secretary of the National Security Agency. He also claimed that AIPAC had people, at least a dozen, in the campaign at the headquarters, and that they all would be getting big jobs. This was recorded by Chaim Katz, a Jewish man who said that he felt that disproportionate power hurts everyone. He's absolutely, positively correct. Now, during the 2022 campaign cycle, this was their backing. They backed 37 GOP members of Congress who voted against certifying the 2020 elections. They defended the actions by saying it was, and I quote, "not a moment for the pro-Israel movement to become selective about its friends." They backed a total of 100 election deniers. They spent $24 million via the United Democracy Project, their PAC, to defeat those not considered pro-Israel enough. They received substantial contributions from Paul Singer, Bernie Marcus, you may recognize those names because they're Trump campaign financiers, and Chaim Saban. $4 million was spent in support of Haley Stevens over Andy Levine, Andy Levin, I'm sorry, who is Jewish. And Andy had been known to be critical of AIPAC's support of hardline policies regarding Israel. $7 million was spent to defeat Donna Edwards, who was quite popular in her district because she did not back resolutions supporting Israel during its war in Gaza in 2012. Tomorrow, we're going to look deeper into the espionage and the two wars that I brought up today. As always, thank you for joining me, and we're going to continue this deep dive journey together. Till tomorrow.